Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion, the Fair Housing Act Then and Now. We hope you just had a chance to view 7 Days, a wonderful film created in partnership between the National Fair Housing Alliance and Nationwide Insurance, which we have panelists representing tonight. First, I want to introduce our moderator before I turn it over to her. Ms. Lisa Hodges-Hyken is the chair of the Housing Committee for the Baltimore chapter of the NAACP. Ms. Hodges is the executive director of Westport Community Economic Development Corporation and founding member of Hodges Development LLC, a firm delivering real estate advisory services for clients ranging from South Baltimore 7 LLC, Enterprise Community Partners, the Town of Easton, the Philadelphia Housing Authority, Mercy Loan Fund, Emerald Cities Collaborative, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Community Development. She is also a senior advisor to Oyster Tree Consulting, L3C, where she developed and delivered a 5-day training in sustainability for HUD, managed a team of trainers, and developed and delivered an organizational assessment for HUD grantees and small housing authorities. She is currently an adjunct professor at Morgan State University and has served as an adjunct lecturer at Howard University School of Architecture, Georgetown University, Tulane University School of Architecture Masters in Sustainable Real Estate program, and developed and currently delivers an Introduction to Real Estate Development certificate program for faith-based organizations at University of Baltimore. She recently served as the director of the School-Centered Neighborhood Investment at the Association of Baltimore Area Grantmakers, an initiative that leveraged the $1 billion 21st Century Schools redevelopment in Baltimore to spark private investment in surrounding communities. So thank you from the Baltimore Office of Equity and Civil Rights, and thank you to Ms. Hodges-Hyken. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Lauren, so much. I am really, really excited because this is actually one of the things that I love to talk about is how there was a bridge between the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and the passage of the Fair Housing Act. I will now introduce our panelists. I'm going to fangirl out for a minute because I love, the National Fair Housing Alliance and Lisa Rice, its president and CEO. We're so lucky to have her on a panel. It is the nation's only national civil rights agency solely dedicated to eliminating all forms of housing discrimination. It's also a trade association for over 200 member organizations across the country that work to eliminate barriers in the housing markets and expand equal housing and lending opportunities. It also provides a range of programs to affirmatively further fair housing, including community development, neighborhood stabilization, training, education, outreach, advocacy, consulting, and enforcement initiatives. Ms. Rice is a member of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights Board of Directors, the Center for Responsible Lending Board of Directors, the JP Morgan Chase Consumer Advisory Council, Mortgage Bankers Association for Consumer Advisory Council, Freddie Mac Affordable Housing Advisory Council, Urban Institute's Mortgage Service Collaborative, Quicken Loans Advisory Committee, and America's Homeowner Alliance Advisory Board. So that's our first panelist. Our second panelist, to round out the triumvirate of Lisas, Lisa Kelly, who is the Community Relations Commission Supervisor in the Baltimore City Office of Equity and Civil Rights. She's a licensed attorney in Illinois and the District of Columbia. She moved to Baltimore in 2009, so we will accept her warmly as a native to be Baltimorean. She has about 10 years of experience working at nonprofit organizations and government agencies in housing complaints, conducting discrimination investigations, and assessing equal opportunity compliance. In 2011, she began working at a foreclosure firm in Rosedale, amending and reviewing foreclosure complaints. Next, she worked for Baltimore Neighborhoods, Inc., which is a well-respected neighborhood nonprofit housing organization. She was their Fair Housing Compliance Officer. And then later she became their Fair Housing Program Manager. So she's got a deep level of experience in fair housing. She must have a passion for it. Next, she investigated housing, employment, and public accommodation discrimination complaints at the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. And then after that, she came to the Baltimore City Office of Equity and Civil Rights and started working at the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services as an equal employment officer. She's provided testimony before the Maryland Office of Administrative Hearings on her investigation. So happy to have Lisa Kelly with us today. And finally, the only non-Lisa on the panel, and the only male on the panel, but he is going to bring it on our panel tonight, Lou Yarbrough III, who is the Associate Vice President of Enterprise, Diverse, and Cause Marketing at Nationwide Insurance. He is responsible for ensuring diverse consumer insights and needs are integrated into enterprise solutions that facilitate enduring relationships. He also develops and manages key alliances and partnerships with organizations that share Nationwide's commitment to improving communities in which their members and associates live and do business. He was previously the leader of the Co-op Advertising and Channel Marketing Communication, and he joined Nationwide in January of 2005. So we have a bunch of rock stars on this panel, and I'm so honored to be moderating this. So we're going to start out with asking Lisa Rice some questions. So Lisa Rice, why was it important for the National Fair Housing Alliance to produce this documentary?
Hi, Lisa. Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay.
Good.
I feel like we need to start a new singing group.
I know, right?
Thank you for that question, and I hope that everybody has had an opportunity to watch 7 Days. This is amazing short film that was executive produced for the National Fair Housing Alliance by Nationwide Insurance Company. We wanted to produce something really special because the National Fair Housing Alliance was leading the effort to commemorate the anniversary of the Federal Fair Housing Act. And we wanted to produce a high quality video for the various events that we were going to be sponsoring throughout the year. We had this footage sort of in our archives featuring Dr. Dorothy Height, who was a stalwart of the civil rights community, worked to help pass the Federal Fair Housing Act. We also had footage featuring Walter Mondale and Ed Brooke, who were the co-authors of the Federal Fair Housing Act. So we reached out to Nationwide, one of our closest partners. We've got a over 20-year relationship with Nationwide, and we asked them because they produce all these amazing commercials and award-winning commercials. So we just asked them if they would kind of use their technical prowess and professional ability to pull these sort of errant videos together that we had and to just put it into one final product for us that we could show throughout the year. And really, Lisa, to our surprise and amazement, we didn't even know, they did not even tell us, and I hope I don't get emotional. They didn't even tell us. They hired an award-winning director and production company to create this short film. They sent crews out across the nation. They filmed new footage. They conducted a new interview with Walter Mondale. They obtained historical footage from President Johnson's library and his archives. They just went on the hunt and found all of this incredible footage and documents and put them into this amazing product. I might add that 7 Days has won several awards, and that's just a testament to all the hard work and care that the Nationwide team put into this really just incredible product.
It really comes through. You really get into the moment. It's a short film, but it really gives you a taste of what it was like, right after the assassination and what was going through folks' mind of what they had, what the mission was, and what they had to accomplish in order to get this act passed. So let's switch gears a little bit and say why don't you tell all of our viewers what the core mission of the National Fair Housing Alliance is, and what are the tools that you use to promote fair housing nationwide?
Sure, happy to do that. The National Fair Housing Alliance is the nation's only national civil rights organization, dedicated to eliminating all forms of housing discrimination. And that includes discrimination in the rental sector, in the real estate sector, in the lending sector, insurance, appraisals. So if it has anything at all to do with housing, we address it under the nation's fair housing laws. We enforce the federal fair housing laws. There are a number of them, including the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was passed right after the end of slavery and after the ending of the Civil War. So we enforce about 7 or 8 federal laws that touch on fair housing or fair lending. We do that by a number of ways. I think that we're probably most noted for our national education and outreach media campaigns. Each year, we launch a new campaign initiative in order to educate consumers about their rights and obligations and opportunities under the Fair Housing Act. And we also engage in public policy initiatives. We have a really robust public policy team to advance fair housing policies, both at the federal and the state level. And I do want to point out 2 new initiatives that we're launching this year, Lisa. One in partnership with Nationwide. It's called Keys Unlock Dreams. This is an initiative to address the growing racial homeownership gap and the growing racial wealth gap. The homeownership gap has grown over the past decade, and now is back to it was in 1890. 1890. So we have regressed so much since the Great Recession that the homeownership gap between whites and blacks is now back to where it was in 1890. So we're partnering with a number of entities to close that racial wealth gap and homeownership gap. The second initiative I want to lift up that we just launched this year is our Tech Equity Initiative, which is designed to eliminate bias in the technologies used in the housing and finance sector.
Nice, very, very good. So it's always evolving, like what we have to deal with in the fair housing arena. I do want to say that we're going to take questions. We are documenting your questions as they come in, and we will take questions after we go through each one of our panelists, introductory questions. So we will get to your questions, and thank you so much for your interest. We want to keep you together. So along the lines of Lisa, how things have changed and how, we have to do things a little bit differently now. One thing that we have now that we didn't have in '68 is the existence of the internet and our use of social media. And a lot of people really depend on social media, not just for, for fun, but to find housing and to market their housing. So how does today's world of social media affect a person's ability to find housing fairly?
Lisa, it has grave impacts because technology can perpetuate bias. It may seem on its face that technologies that we use, like social media, are fairly innocuous, but they're not. Social media platforms can generate discrimination, just even in terms of who's able to see an advertisement for a housing unit or a financial product. In fact, Lisa, last year, the National Fair Housing Alliance entered into a precedent-setting agreement with Facebook because Facebook's advertising platform was perpetuating bias. In fact, in some ways, it was designed to perpetuate discrimination. Facebook's platform allowed advertisers to turn on and off certain audiences based on characteristics like race or ethnicity or gender. In fact, if you wanted to turn off African American audiences, Latino audiences, or Asian American audiences, you could do that on Facebook's system, but you could not turn off white audiences.
Wow.
So the bias was baked into the actual design of the platform. That case resulted in 8 big changes in the way that Facebook does its business now to help eliminate discriminatory outcomes is one of the reasons why we started the Tech Bias Initiative that I mentioned earlier to address challenges like this and to really make the marketplace more fair.
Wow, thank you so much for all the work you do. We're going to come back at the end of our round of questions to have you bring us home. I want to move on to Lisa Kelly, who is, a I would say new-ish Baltimore a resident, but we welcome her because she's doing really, really important work. So Lisa Kelly, I wanted to ask you, we recently had in Baltimore a great legislative victory in the city to further fair housing with the passage of the anti-source of income discrimination law. And your office was really a key supporter and really helped us get over the finish line with that. So what role does your office have in making sure landlords don't discriminate against prospective tenants?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, source of income legislation was enacted and passed by the Baltimore City Council on April 12th of 2019. And essentially what it said was it added source of income as a protected class to the anti-discrimination housing provision out of Baltimore City, Article 4 of the Baltimore City Code. And Article 4 of the Baltimore City Code is normally referred to as the Community Relations Article. And so essentially what it said was that someone using a specific type of income, such as a housing choice voucher, would be treated similarly and compared to somebody that was using maybe a more recognized or more utilized type of income, such as income that is coming from a occupation or a job. And so we know that source of income, this became about because we know that when source of income is protected, we know that it reduces crowding, it reduces housing instability, it reduces poverty and homelessness. We know that it helps low-wage workers meet their financial obligations. We know that it gives families access to neighborhoods with better options, and that it also reduces costs in healthcare and other public services. So just to step back, you asked about our office's role in protecting source of income. So just to step back and give you a little bit of background about our office is an umbrella office. So the Office of Equity and Civil Rights is actually an umbrella office, and it's split into two divisions. So the first division is the Equity Division. And then the second division is the Civil Rights Division. And within that Civil Rights Division, we have the Wage Commission, the Mayor's Commission on Disabilities, and then we have the Community Relations Commission, as well as the Civilian Review Board. Now, the Community Relations Commission is the city agency that is tasked and responsible for investigating these complaints of discrimination. And so the complaints of discrimination that take place in the 5 critical areas of Baltimore city life. So that's housing, public accommodations, employment, health and welfare, and education. And so I like to look at our role as 4-part, right? So it's investigatory, it's providing education and outreach, and then also compliance. So I spoke a little bit about the investigation part, but when it comes to education, we provide training to community organizations, housing professionals, and housing groups and things of that nature. Outreach is really kind of getting out the word, letting folks know about the discrimination laws in Baltimore City. So we do that like through social media, printed advertisements, public service announcements, and things of that nature. And then lastly, compliance. So when someone brings either an inquiry or a discrimination complaint to our office, just following through, making sure that people are in compliance with Article 4 of the Baltimore City.
So I'm going to ask you, how many complaints do you receive for housing discrimination? So you work on compliance. It's a hugely important area. Give us a sense of the volume of those complaints you receive.
Sure. So as I said, the Community Relations Commission investigates complaints from Baltimore City, the Article 4 Baltimore City Code. And our our law is not substantially similar to the Federal Fair Housing Act. We have a couple of additional protected classes, but then we also have a few exemptions and exclusions that don't match up with the Federal Fair Housing Law. So that's to try to, give you some context. So for calendar year 2020, we received overall 52 inquiries. So that includes housing, employment, the whole gamut. And then of those 52, we received 21 housing inquiries. And then of that 21 housing inquiries, 4 materialized to fair housing complaints. Now, that could be a variety of reasons. Sometimes we don't cover the protected class that the complainant is calling about, or we don't cover the prohibited activity. So that's one of the couple of reasons why it might not materialize into a housing complaint. I do want to make note that we've been collecting information about COVID-19. And so we have gotten 66 COVID-19 inquiries.
Wow.
Now, that relates to a variety of things. There are people calling the office asking about COVID-19 eviction information, eviction resources, information about rent court, releases, renewals, things of that information. But it also includes employment questions and also healthcare related questions. So it just kind of goes to show how housing is kind of related and touches all of these areas of life, right? Okay. And then I do also want to make note that in 2019, we were granted funding through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for education and outreach. So specifically to, get the information out about federal fair housing, specifically in the Baltimore City community. And that grant has really broadened and really increased our education and outreach input and impact in Baltimore City. And then a couple of more things. We also got a second installment of that grant. So we're looking to do more things with the education and outreach funding from HUD. And then lastly, and I hope I'm not, letting the cat out of the bag, but we were recently notified that we got additional funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, specifically as it relates to COVID-19 and housing related issues with that. So that's pending negotiation, but we were advised of that. And I think that's really important. We're really looking forward to that because, like I said, when it comes down to COVID-19 and these housing related questions and inquiries that we're receiving in the office, we know that folks need this information and they need it quickly and they need it urgently. So we are really looking forward to providing that information through those number of grants.
Lisa, congratulations on that. I mean, nothing succeeds like success. So now you're going to have a lot more probably folks coming to you and trying to get that information. And we thank you for, all your hard work. I think, it's good for people to hear what you can help them with and how you really contribute to our quality of life in the city. So I want to switch gears and go back to the documentary for a second because, it's so poignant, really. We are reminded, today, how, protest is really, really important and how to move legislators to act. That's what happened with 7 days. And that is, part of what we are trying to bring to our experience today. We have a strong culture of protest in Baltimore. That's why we were called Mobtown. And we know that in order to affect long-term change, we have to marry protest with advocacy. So give us some advice, Lisa. How can we advocate on the local level to support equity and expansion of civil rights?
Sure. So we know with the source of income legislation, the office was in a really good position to support the legislation that was brought forth by the city council because people were walking through the doors, people were calling on the phone, and people were writing us. And we were really the staff was really receiving these inquiries. So we were really in a good place to talk about source of income. I would like to note that the investigatory agencies that's within our office, they are not advocates. So the investigators are third-party neutral investigators. So they kind of look at it from a fact-finding purpose. So when it comes down to like, as far as looking for facts and making that kind of determination in the investigation, that's what the investigators do, as opposed to like an attorney advocating for one side or the other. I will say that I think it's super also important to note that, as was mentioned earlier, I was an advocate before I moved on to my investigative agencies. I worked for Baltimore Neighborhoods Incorporated, which was a very famous nonprofit fair housing organization that was located in Baltimore City, and they really functioned. The office, BNI, really functioned as an advocate as well as a compliance organization. And so, because there would be folks in the neighborhood that would call and they would ask for assistance in particular fair housing issues. For example, I do remember while I was there, BNI filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development circa around 2011, 2012 against Baltimore County, because it felt that it was not living up to its obligations for affirmatively furthering fair housing, as well as its zoning and policies and practices discriminated against families with children, as well as individuals with disability. And I believe that complaint settled in 2016. But I say all that to say that, advocacy is very, very important. And my recommendations include really keeping informed on any upcoming legislation, and making sure that you're aware of what that means, what the legislation means, and what impact that it could have upon you and the community. I know that it's also important for folks to get involved in housing advocacy groups and organizations. That was one of the main supporters of the source of income legislation, various housing groups in Baltimore City. And then once you get involved with that, then you can also encourage others to join so that your footprint is impactful by the numbers in the organization. And then lastly, my last recommendation is, to know and get to know and contact your legislators on a local, a state, and a federal level. And it's two-part, right? Because you first let them know that you're aware of the legislation, and that you're interested in it, and then also that you can then use that opportunity to let them know your thoughts and opinions of the legislation.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. That is great advice. So last but not least, we have Lou Yarbrough, the third Associate VP at Nationwide Insurance for Enterprise Diversity and Cause Marketing. That is a big title. So Lou, give us a little background on what motivated Nationwide to really enter this space and produce this documentary, because I don't think a lot of people think about Nationwide necessarily when it comes to fair housing. So give us some background on that. How did this partnership come together?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here tonight. It is a pleasure to be here with the Lisas, and it is awesome. So how we got started, really, it is in Nationwide's DNA. Nationwide started over 90 years ago as a small group of individuals that was focused on creating more value for its members and making a difference in the lives of others. And, we had spent a couple of decades partnering with Lisa and the National Fair Housing Alliance. And, you spend any time with NAFA, you really, really begin to understand that there's very few things that can impact the quality of somebody's life than where they live in their housing. It impacts a person's education, their food stability, if they're in a food desert. It impacts their health care. It even impacts the quality of education that folks receive as well. And so it was one of those things that when you learn the impact that housing has, it has to be something that's kind of important to you if you're in insurance and financial services. And then Lisa also, I remember the day when she kind of shared the story with me in her office in DC about how the assassination of Martin Luther King was directly linked to the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And once I grew up when you know more, you do more. And so we could not let this story continue to go untold. And so it was an easy project for us to lean into once we kind of married those two things together. So that's why we really are motivated to partner with them to create this great documentary.
And it really was great. I mean, like I said, it puts you right in the middle of it. You can really kind of feel all of the tension about what was, kind of happening in that era. So, I think a lot of people really don't think about discrimination when it comes to insurance and other housing products and access. Give us some insight. Are there other things that consumers need to be thinking about when it comes to insurance and housing to make sure that they have equal access to the products and services that are provided?
So there are two things that I would say. I would say folks would need to think about. One, they need to think about being intentional about who they do business with and who they partner with, because every organization does not have your best interest at heart. Every organization does not want you to succeed. So you got to be intentional about who you partner with. That's number one. Number two is to get engaged. When a National Fair Housing Alliance comes to your town and talks about keys to unlock dreams and talk about home, or get engaged, educate yourself, bring other people along so that you know what is available to you. Those are the two biggest things that I would say people need to think about, being intentional, because sometimes we don't. And then second, get engaged, because those are the two things that can help you not only have a positive outcome for yourself and your family, but for those that are closest to you and the community as a whole.
Okay, so that's really good advice. I'm going to ask for just a quick spin on how the internet and social media has changed the way that Nationwide has done business, and in general, give a couple of things on that, and then we're going to kind of switch to a question from our audience. Go ahead, Lou.
Okay. So how the internet has impacted our industry, probably just like it has a number of others. One, it allows consumers to have a lot more information at their disposal, and with that information, that greater education that they have, now they know what options are available to them, and so now that is facilitated a dialogue as opposed to a one-way conversation. If one partner in the exchange has all the information and the other one does not, you can speak at them. And now with the internet, it has forced a lot of entities, organizations that may have gotten comfortable with that one-sided exchange, have to develop the new muscle of it being a two-way dialogue. And then second, around social media, it itself, the way that it is set up, allows for an ongoing conversation. So for us at Nationwide, we want to have ongoing conversations with customers, members, and potential customers, where it's two-way, as opposed to a 15-minute soundbite or an advertisement that goes one way. So having ongoing conversations, that's how we build enduring relationships.
Okay, thank you so much. That is really, really great. So we're gonna take a question from our audience. The question, and I'll throw it out to the panel. There are a lot of banks that don't provide loans under $100,000 and thus create a barrier to low and moderate income families to become homeowners. What do you suggest that we can do to address this issue to allow families to have a chance to create intergenerational wealth?
Well, there's one option that they can take advantage of is, I'm throwing a plug to attend the Black Enterprise Entrepreneurial Summit that'll be coming later this year, because one of the things that I was made aware of being partnering with them is those organizations and entities that are out there that are making microloans. They exist. And again, this goes back to getting engaged, and you've got to know where to go. And that entrepreneurial conference is a place or where you can go and learn about organizations that are offering microloans and micro products that they can take advantage of that are under that dollar amount, that threshold.
And I strongly encourage anyone who experiences that to contact your local fair housing organization. You can visit our website at nationalfairhousing.org and find a local fair housing group in your community. That fair housing organization can conduct an investigation to determine whether or not that kind of a policy is a viable policy and whether or not it violates fair housing laws. It may well. It depends on what service area you're in. And Lou is right. There are a number of organizations, community development financial institutions, minority depository institutions that do not have those kinds of policies that end up disproportionately impacting consumers of color.
And just to piggyback off of Lisa's comment, if you are engaged in your local fair housing advocacy group, those people might have already experienced similar situations too. So that's always kind of good to know, like if someone else has experienced that before and what kind of things they have done to essentially handle it. You know.
Great answers. Thank you for the resources, panelists. Our second question is many families also lose their homes due to liens. Are there any resources, or do you all individually or do your organizations help families avoid foreclosure due to liens or back taxes?
Yeah, so that is a tough issue. The first thing that you have to figure out is why the lien is being assessed, and if the lien is being assessed fairly. There's a major lawsuit pending right now against Detroit, Michigan, because during the predatory lending crisis, when property values really went down really, really low in the city, the city was actually over assessing the values and taxing people at that higher assessed amount. It had a discriminatory impact, of course, on homeowners of color. The city has a new program now, by the way. Let me hasten to say they have a new forgiveness program where they will forgive those liens to allow homeowners to stay in their homes. So the first thing that you want to do is figure out why the lien is there. If it is because of a tax assessment, was the assessment correct? And you know, that may be hard for the typical consumer to do. So your local fair housing organizations are there to help you process that and to investigate those claims. But the other thing that you definitely want to do is to reach out to your local city or your county to find out if there are programs where you can get the lien forgiven or paid for. There are a number of those programs that exist. And in fact, the National Fair Housing Alliance has funded different municipalities to operate those kinds of programs.
Thank you. That's those are great resources, and I hope our folks are taking notes here. I also wanted to point out, if you wanted to tweet about this, we got a couple of hashtags. Hashtag #BeMoreFHFF, hashtag #BeMoreHousing, hashtag #BeMoreCivil. Let's go to the next question, which I think might be directed to Lisa Kelly. What are other key partners you are working with on your outreach efforts in the city? And have you been working with neighborhood leaders?
So I know that we have been working with several various public service organizations, such as the Public Justice Center, as well as a few other. I know that their names escape me at the moment, but we have been working with a few to especially develop our education and outreach for fair housing for fiscal year 20. So yes, and if anyone wants to suggest a leader that we should work with, please let us know. Contact us at our office.
Thank you. That's good to know. Let me go back to Lisa Rice and ask the question. So the National Fair Housing Alliance was the lead plaintiff in the case against HUD's gutting of affirmatively furthering fair housing, and now that lawsuit has been, dismissed. We're all disappointed in that. Where do we go from here at the national level to make sure that we get back to, affirmatively furthering fair housing?
Lisa, thank you. That's a great question. We were very disappointed too. The judge in that case felt that there was an effective complaint process in place if municipalities or if citizens in a particular city felt that their city was not effectively furthering fair housing. So Lisa Kelly actually mentioned this, right? When she talked about the action that BNI brought against Baltimore back in 2011. Well, in 2011, the Obama administration had put in a complaint process, but that complaint process was, of course, annihilated by the Trump administration. So there is no complaint process. And the Trump administration just released a new affirmatively furthering fair housing rule that is very, very weak. It's not even a fair housing rule. It's not a fair housing rule at all. So what we're doing is ramping up to fight HUD to compel them to enforce the law. We are calling on HUD to withdraw this rule that they just promulgated. It was just a few weeks ago, and reinstate the 2015 rule that is more robust and has more tools. It actually has the tools and mechanisms that cities and jurisdictions asked HUD to put in place to allow those cities and jurisdictions to better comply with the affirmatively furthering fair housing provision. And for those who don't know, let me tell you what affirmatively furthering fair housing says. Okay? It says that no municipality and no entity that receives federal funds, that receives federal funds for a housing or community development purpose can use those funds to engage in discrimination or perpetuate segregation. That's what it says. And the Trump administration is opposed to very strict and tools and mechanisms to effectively enforce that provision of the Fair Housing Act. That provision of the Fair Housing Act, there is no private right of action, which means that if a municipality violates that provision of the law, you can't go and sue the municipality. It is really up to HUD to enforce that provision. So we're also calling on cities and public housing authorities and other entities that receive federal funds to voluntarily comply with the letter and the spirit of the law. And we are finding many municipalities, including Baltimore and Baltimore County, who want to do this and are doing it on their own. We are calling on other entities to support the affirmatively furthering fair housing provision as well. And in fact, Lisa, we just saw many financial services institutions step up in a major way to oppose another of the Trump administration's proposals to weaken and roll back the fair housing laws and regulations. So we're building out more support for fair housing. There has been an awakening. You know, people are realizing when they saw the impacts of COVID-19, to the point that Lou was making earlier, you know, people began to really better realize that what we're facing is not something that an individual person can fix. You can't go out here and fix this on your own. The challenges that we're facing are systemic, and we have to have tools like disparate impact and AFFH in order to address these systemic issues that are presenting barriers to people in the marketplace.
So I think you kind of answered this. We had a question that came in. How is the current HUD administration addressing affordable housing? Are they doing enough? I think you kind of answered that. But then if you, maybe put a bow on that and then get into the last question, which is, does HUD ever ask local city entities to investigate complaints of fair housing violations? Like do they ever make referrals, I guess, to local entities?
Sure, I can take the first part. I can put the bow on it and then lob it over to Lisa Kelly to answer the second part. So yeah, that first question is really loaded, y'all. It's really loaded, okay? It's really loaded. And my mother taught me, if you can't say something nice, So what I will say is that we have been working with HUD over the past 3.5 years to get HUD to understand the importance. First of all, to understand when the new administration came in, when the new team came in, we spent an incredible amount of time educating the new team about fair housing issues, educating them about fair lending issues. The new team that came in, they did not have a depth of knowledge about fair housing issues. So we had to explain what is affirmatively furthering fair housing, what is disparate impact. So you spent an incredible amount of time educating folks. We haven't gotten the full support that we would have liked, but we have had some wins. And Lisa Kelly pointed to just one. When the COVID crisis hit, we immediately met with HUD. We explained to HUD how the pandemic was going to be negatively impacting consumers. And we asked HUD to please support our call for increased fair housing funding. Our fair housing organization saw a 30% increase in complaints since the filing of the pandemic. And so HUD did support that. And so you heard Lisa say that her organization just got a grant to help educate people about COVID-19 related issues. So we have some wins and some losses. I will say there is a long way to go, and we're still plugging away.
And
Lisa
so,
Kelly?
yeah, and so just to follow up with that, HUD does refer cases to what they call FAP agencies. So if you have a substantially similar law, they will refer that complaint over to you, and you can investigate, and they'll have you investigate it. But as I mentioned, Article 4 is not substantially similar to the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968. So we do not investigate complaints as if they were a federal fair housing complaint. But I will say this, the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights is a state FAP agency. So if there is a housing complaint and you would like it to be investigated through the state, then Maryland Commission on Civil Rights would be that agency.
Okay, so let me just ask a clarifying question that came in. So if your organization, your office is investigating a HUD complaint, would there be a reason to file with the Baltimore City Community Relations Commission? And what's how does that interact?
So absolutely. So as I mentioned, maybe a few minutes ago, regarding Article 4. So Article 4 gives you more protected classes. So it's more broad than the Federal Fair Housing Act. So I believe that we have sexual orientation, ancestry, age, gender identity, and expression as groups of individuals that are protected under our housing provisions. But it also has exclusions, and it exempts particular people and groups from the law. So one of the benefits of our law is that it does include more people as protected, but then it may also exclude more people from actually the law applying to certain housing providers and housing professionals, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you all so much. This has been so wonderful. I'm excited that to kind of be introduced to 7 Days, the documentary. I'm excited to have spent this time with you all, and I think our viewing audience has also been excited to to see this and to hear from you. So Lisa Rice, again, President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Lisa Kelly, the Community Relations Commission Supervisor for the Baltimore City Office of Equity and Civil Rights, the three Lisas, yay. And then, Lou, bringing it all together, bringing it home, Lou Yarbrough III, Associate Vice President of Enterprise Diverse and Cause Marketing at Nationwide Insurance. Thank you all so much for everything. We want to, keep the party going. We want to remind folks that there are other movies coming out this week, and please check the website to find out more. Thank you all for your time tonight and giving us an exciting look into fair housing. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.